Assalamu alaikum all, good evening. Welcome to the first Sunnah Fast virtual iftar, which is brought to you by the Ramadan 10 Project. We will be holding these every Monday and Thursdays as we aim to revive the Sunnah and maintain the mindfulness of Ramadan all year round. It was narrated by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that whoever fasts Ramadan and then follows it with 6 days from Shawwal, it is as if they have fasted the entire year. And we encourage you to join us in this blessed month to gain the rewards of fasting these 6 days, as well as providing a space for people to continue to develop our spirituality, reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and keep the spirit of Ramadan alive all year round. For those of you who have joined us during Ramadan, welcome back. For those of you who have been here for the first time, welcome. I really do hope you guys get what you want out of this. The purpose of not just this virtual iftar, but all open iftars is to create a safe environment for people to join and come together and bring communities together so that they better understand each other. We are really looking forward to this session because it is quite a topical one. It's something which everyone at Ramadan 10 Project is passionate about. Obviously, it's something our guest speakers are passionate about. So we do encourage everyone to join us and feel free to ask as many questions as possible. I'm delighted to announce that we have the inspiring brother, Mustafa Briggs. I've got Ayo Olatunji, and I've got the inspiring writer and author Hafsa Dabiri, who has been with us in the past. For those of you who remember, during Ramadan, she was speaking for our My Open Iftars. So all three of these speakers we're really looking forward to hear. So again, guys, please feel free to ask as many questions as possible. Use the raise hand features, use the reactions button. Make this as interactive as possible. So I really do urge you guys to get to know one another. We're now going to move on to our three guest speakers, to Mustafa, to Ayo, and to Hafsa. Assalamu alaikum, guys. First of all, welcome. I want to say a big thank you to all three of you guys for agreeing to do this. Obviously, a lot's happened since we all last spoke during Ramadan. So I'm going to start off with Mustafa, then I'm going to go to Hafsa, and then I'm going to go to Ayo. And I'm just going to ask you all, just if you don't mind, do you mind just sharing a few words of just some of your thoughts of what's been happening in the current situation, not just in terms of what's been happening over stateside, but in this country and also in the context of what we've had in terms of the pandemic. So Mustafa, if you don't mind, please take over.
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala. Alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'd like to thank people that have organized this event, Omar Salha and the whole entire team, inshallah, and thank everyone that's present, alhamdulillah. Just to say that the time that we're in and the things that we're seeing are not just, the result of a single event, but it's an amalgamation of years and years of social conditioning, cultural conditioning, systemic anti-blackness, and a lot of different things added up. And it feels like right now it's reached the limit. And so people have decided to rise up and speak out against it and act out against it. Because essentially they've had enough. I feel like that's what it is. Alhamdulillah, Allah says in the Quran, "Kulli shay'in lahu ajrun musamma." Everything with Allah has an appointed time. So I feel like even though it has been going on for years, maybe this is the appointed time that Allah has chosen to deal with the situation and to allow people to rise up in this situation. So it's important that we as Muslims are taking part in conversations like this, and you're inviting, alhamdulillah, people like Ayo, people like Hafsa Dabiri and myself to speak about situations like this. And inshallah, hopefully we can be a catalyst for change, and we can be the change that we want to see in our societies, and we can be the ones that contribute towards the alleviation of oppression and the alleviation of the struggles of mankind, as we are commanded to do by Allah as Muslims. Allah commands us in the Quran to be qa'imina bil qist, people who stand up for justice. And Allah also commands us to be witnesses for justice, even if it's against ourselves and our parents and our children and our brothers and our neighbors. And so when you combine all of that, nobody should be more involved in this situation than us. nobody should have more to say about the situation than us, and the same energy that we put towards other causes should be equivalent to the energy that we put towards this cause. Alhamdulillah, I was listening to a lecture by a sheikh recently, and he had a very interesting viewpoint. He said he believes that if the Prophet ﷺ had come down during the time of Che Guevara, or if Che Guevara had been present in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he believes that no one would have been a Sahaba before him, because the Prophet ﷺ in his early days of Islam was preaching Tawheed, but he wasn't preaching the rituals in terms of Salah, Zakat, Hajj, and Sawm as we know it. The Prophet ﷺ was preaching justice and social equality or social equity in his time, and that's what he was striving for in the earliest days of his mission. If we look at the earliest surah of the Quran revealed in Mecca, most of them talk about justice. Why are you not feeding the poor? Why are you not giving zakat? Why are you not fighting for the rights of female women, female girls that are being buried alive? Why are you not fighting for the rights of the orphans, the underprivileged in society? And so Allah has kept that theme running until today, where we see that people are now standing up for people who are underprivileged in society, people who are looked down upon in society. So it's our duty as Muslims to be on the forefront of that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for that, Mustafa. I really appreciate those words. I'm gonna, before we get the discussions going, I'm gonna ask Hafsa Dabiri if you could share a few words with us, and then we'll go on to Aya, and then we can start the discussions with everyone, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I pray that everybody is well, and I pray that everybody is protecting their health and their iman first and foremost throughout everything, because we're not only in lockdown with a pandemic happening, but then we're also going through these changes as well in terms of society and politics. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us all. I think one of the things that I wanted to stress in, I've done a couple of Zoom sessions today, so I think one of the things that I wanted to stress, inshallah, is the idea that this isn't a moment. I saw a post on Instagram, I think we've seen many posts on Instagram recently, that we have a choice whether or not we allow this to transform ourselves currently, or if it's just going to be a moment where everybody's hashtagging Black Lives Matter during this period and then kind of forgets about it later on. And for me, the really important element of ensuring that this creates lasting change is two things. So the first is community, and the second is education. So in terms of community, I feel like it's really important that we look around ourselves, within our masjids, within our homes, and look towards what are the issues of anti-blackness and racism and inequalities that exist within our communities, and what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about those things. So if you've realized that within your masjid there's an issue in terms of how the leadership is structured, or microaggressions, I think it's really important that you look at that. And even when it comes to community within your household, within yourself, within how you communicate with other people and how you communicate as a family, how can you discuss these issues? How can you find solutions, and how can you address the privilege that you might experience within those communities and as an individual? And for that to happen, you need knowledge. You need knowledge of what that privilege looks like. You need knowledge of what anti-racism looks like, and what non-optical and non-performative allyship looks like. And so reading is so important, subhanAllah. Within our religion, it's called upon us to seek knowledge. It should be the foundation. It's the foundation of our faith and the foundation of who we are as individuals. And so you have to seek knowledge, whether it be Islamic knowledge and whether it be knowledge politically and socially about what's happening, but specifically Islamic knowledge, because I was on another Zoom session a couple of days ago, subhanAllah, and the brother was expressing that how he doesn't know whether or not to place his children within Islamic schools where they experience anti-blackness and racism, or whether to place them in public schools where they experience anti-blackness and racism, because within the non-Islamic school, you can say that, okay, yeah, it's because they don't understand the religion. It's because they don't understand the morals and values that we should be centering in Islam. But then when you look at the Islamic school, how can you use that excuse, subhanAllah? So for me, it's really important that we reconnect with our faith and our understanding of what it means to be a Muslim, and what that means in terms of how you communicate with other Muslims and how you view differences and cultures, subhanAllah. And for it not to be performative in how you do that, for it to be something that you actually do tadabbur upon, you reflect upon, and really try to understand what are the feelings of privilege that I feel within myself. Really critically analyze your thoughts and your actions and your words, inshallah. And so, yeah, for me, let me just touch upon it again, the idea of community and education. And I think that turns back to kind of the focus on kind of how we're bringing up our kids as well, subhanAllah. I don't have children yet, but I have siblings, I have younger brothers, I have younger sisters, and I've seen them grappling with their identity, subhanAllah, and not understanding how blackness can fit into Islam. And that comes from, again, their need to be educated, but then it also comes from the privilege that they view other Muslims having and enforcing upon them in whether it be verbal aggression or microaggressions. So we have to be looking and protecting that generation of people, because subhanAllah, you know, they can transform things as long as we educate them in terms of what they need to be educated upon. So yeah, that's inshallah what I'll leave you guys with, inshallah. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah for that, Hafsa. And as someone who's got 2 young nieces, I can tell you right now, your book, what you've written, for someone who's, you know, raised in Western society around white culture, you don't understand, like, and for me personally, I just want to say thanks, because the impact and how powerful it is to have someone like yourself write books for people like my nieces. Like, it's just, you know, words can't describe that. So from me, from the bottom of my heart, jazakallah for what you've done, and thank you for
thank you.
the community. I'm now going to ask Ayo, if you can, I'm just going to unmute you, if you could just share your thoughts with us, and then we'll start getting the questions in and get the discussion on.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khair for having me on. I think, just to sum up my thoughts, I think the conversation has moved very quickly over a short space of time. It started off in the US, then the conversation moved over to the UK, then the conversation became about what is the Muslim community doing. And these shifts happened sometimes in the space of a few hours. And I think, you know, people are asking, what is the Muslim community doing about this? And some people within the community perhaps are saying, why is this an issue that concerns us? And I think it's very important to emphasize that if there is an issue of injustice affecting a Muslim or a non-Muslim, Muslims should be standing there. They should be standing against that injustice. And I think, you know, summing up everything that's happened, I think it's actually quite a shame. And the thing that I think is a big shame is that at a time where you literally have, you know, the black community is in a lot of trauma, there's a collective sort of consciousness and trauma that's felt throughout the black community. This is a time, I think, you know, they're literally going, you know, we're going through you know, mental trauma from viewing these attacks, from viewing these killings. You know, these are things, as was said before, this isn't just something that's happened, you know, in the last couple of weeks. There are literally videos like this coming out every single day, and they're coming from all over the world. But I think there was something about, you know, being in lockdown, the frustration of being in lockdown. Everybody's at home, so everybody's viewing their social media, everybody's very engaged and locked on. And this wasn't an issue that you could ignore. You couldn't just scroll away and get past it. Everybody's sort of tuned in. And I think that sort of sensitized everybody and really got people moving. However, I think the shame is that at a time the black community is feeling such a deep, you know, mental, physical and spiritual sort of trauma, this would be the time, you know, I think what subhanAllah would have been amazing for Muslims to have presented the solution of Islam. And I think Islam really is the solution. Malcolm X, rahimahullah, you know, he went from saying literally at one point when he was with the Nation of Islam, he literally said that the only, you know, and, you know, included the Nation of Islam that he was with, their predominant thought was that, you know, the only way black people can truly have any freedom, or the way, you know, racism can be pushed out of this society, is through separation. At the end of his life, you know, he got to the point where he said that Islam is the religion that he believes can solve America's racism problem. And I think this is still true of today, right? And I think it's just sad because Muslims, you know, ourselves as Muslims, the wider community, the Muslims who aren't black, you know, we have the solution. You know, I think we'll speak on later how people quote Bilal as black as a sort of rebuttal, or they quote hadith and verses. The issue is not quoting the hadith. The issue is not quoting the verses. The issue is not using somebody, you know, an esteemed companion from our tradition. It's the way you're using it in terms of a rebuttal and the way you're hiding behind it. And I think if we could actually truly embody these values that we find in the ayat, in the hadith, in our tradition, in the history of our tradition, and we could actually push that, you know, and come out and support and help, you know, the wider black community, non-Muslim or Muslim, I think, you know, we'd have really been having different discussions, because right now people are in pain, they're angry, they're frustrated, and rightly so. There's so much injustice going on around. But I think, you know, it's just sad. I feel like it's a shame that we as a community have missed out on that opportunity to present our solution, the solution. But, you know, inshallah, you know, conversations like this, I think, are a stepping stone for us to get to that point. But just to echo and my last few words, I think, as was said before, it's really about education. It's really about, you know, standing for justice, whether it be within yourself, question yourself, be honest with yourself, ask yourself those hard questions, stand for justice against your parents, relatives, neighbors, anybody around you. And then as a community, we can take those concrete steps forward to stand for justice in wider society.
Jazakum khairan, Ayo and Mustafa and Hafsa for those. I think you've summarized everything that we wanted to speak about this whole session in those three quick points to get us started. And I think there's so much to unpack in everything that each one of you has said, and I think this is a conversation that cannot be had, as you've already mentioned. It's not a moment, it's a long period of time that needs to be spent having these conversations, having these discussions, and unlearning various thought processes and internalized issues that we have within us as the Muslim community. But let's kind of take this back to basics. I think that would be useful for us to take it back to basics. A lot of the rebuttals that you'd get from within the Muslim community, and definitely without, is, I would say, something that stems from an insecurity of being unjust towards someone else, that you cannot accept that I, being who I am, could possibly inflict injustice upon somebody else. And I think that's where this kind of arrogance comes from, this ego that, you kidding me, I'm a Muslim, Bilal was black, I believe that Bilal goes to Jannah, so how can I be unjust towards you? And I think this is something that we all need to work on massively. So yeah, to take it back to basics, I'll just want to ask Mustafa this specifically. Do you think that Muslims learning about our own history and the rich depths of Islamic history within the black community, within Africa, within America, within all these different scenarios that specifically apply to the black community, do you think that is a first step towards Muslims kind of trying to move on and unlearn and become better, basically, in interacting with the black community and interacting with injustice towards the black community?
I do feel that is essential knowledge that we should all try and look for, and I did try to provide this through my lecture series Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam, just to remove this whole scapegoating of, oh well, you know, there's no racism because Bilal was there, or I'm nice, I'm not anti-black, Bilal was there. And so trying to educate people about the fact that many of the prophets, the essential prophets in the Quran, were described as black. The vast community of black Sahaba, both Arab and East African, who are around the Prophet ﷺ, and the spread of Islam in Africa, and educating people about the contributions that African scholars have made to the history of Islam, etc. I feel like it is a very, very essential knowledge, because knowledge is the only thing that can allow us to remove the ignorance that we have and the racism that we have, because I feel like racism and anti-blackness, etc., is all based on a mindset through perpetuated stereotypes and institutionalized white supremacy and Arab supremacy within our religion, from both sides, from the colonial aspect and from the Arab kind of glorification aspect. And so when we try and break down those things, reconstruct those ideas, and re-educate people, it can serve as a tool to allow people to stop being racist. And I feel like it's more effective with probably younger generations than older generations, but the future generation is the future. So it's important to re-educate them, or allow the education that they receive to be based on more knowledge than the previous generations. So for example, many people study the histories of the prophets, but they don't realize that either the Quran itself or the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba or the scholars of tafsir have described essential ulul azmi min al-rusul, like essential prophets such as Adam, Musa, Isa, as being black. And when people picture them, because of the images that we have through, Christo-Judaic depiction of these prophets, we feel like they're white or they're light-skinned, Middle Eastern, etc., not realizing that the Prophet ﷺ, numerous ahadith, numerous tafsir have described them as being dark-skinned or black people. And then going on to the Sahaba, beyond Bilal, going on to the fact that Islam was first established in Ethiopia and Eritrea before it was established even in Mecca and Medina. And all of these things, it just kind of serves to highlight and make you rethink about the role that black people have within the religion and the religion has had in black history. And then I feel like once you build on that foundation, then you're able to kind of break down a lot of the stereotypes and the internal anti-blackness you have, and then push that forward into manifesting in your actions. So I do feel like it's very important for us as Muslims to know these things. And Allah has mentioned this knowledge, and the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned this knowledge, not in vain, but in order for us to benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Jazakum khairan, I completely agree with that. And as somebody who is an Arab and was raised within an Arab household, I only found out that Adam meant black when I was about 15, 16 and learning my own knowledge and stuff. And I thought, how ridiculous is that? Subhanallah. Lots to unpack there, but just to keep the conversation going, there is Bushra here who's asked us a question about how we can access your Beyond Bilal and Before Malcolm X lectures. And I think this is a great starting point for anybody who wants to understand a bit more and delve into it. So how can we do that?
All my lectures are available on a platform called Crowdcast. So if you go to my Instagram and you check the link in my bio, it has all of my previous lectures, and then you can just register and rewatch them there. I'll also share a link with you guys in the convo, inshallah. I'll try and find it.
That's much appreciated. There's, I think, just to keep the conversation moving, or else I keep pondering on every word everyone's saying. But just, this is a question more for you, Hafsa. There are there's an overlap between different kinds of identities which are oppressed, which I think you hold as a black Muslim woman. That I think when you think of all the different things, I think that just, that's everything all in one. All the different brownie points for racism, sexism, etc., Islamophobia. So my question is twofold. How do you on a personal level deal with so much of this? How would you recommend that we deal with this? And secondly to that, your work and representing these identities, I think, links in a lot with your point about education and and what Mustafa was just talking about now, and being able to educate people. So how do you use your platform and to do that, and what are you trying to achieve? What should we be taking away from your work?
Inshallah. I'll just add disability onto that as well, so ableism in that, so all four, alhamdulillah. And I think the fact that we're able to smile at it is basically where the starting point is. I think with any of the issues when it comes to identity, it can be quite overwhelming. I think especially with blackness, and as Aya mentioned, the trauma that comes with seeing things online, you have to protect your mental health, and that can only be protected with obviously healthcare, but then obviously your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You need to be okay with who you are and who you are in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, and truly understand what your purpose is. And that for me is the first step in sort of any sort of identity conflict. I think secondary to that is then also being more solution focused than dwelling in the issue. I think it's one thing to really understand who you are and understand the conflict that comes with that, but then to find solutions for yourself as an individual. So on an individual level, it could be if you have I think a disability or a chronic illness, it would be making your home more accessible to you, making your daily activities more accessible to you. But then in the wider community, if you've seen an issue with accessibility within your school, for example, or university, then finding solutions to making that not only easy for yourself, but then easy for anybody else who might walk into that space and have a similar disability to you. And that all is centered in the idea of Islam and the fact that when you go into a place, you have to leave it better than you met it. So if you have seen that there is an issue, you have to work towards ensuring that you are finding solutions. So for me specifically, in terms of blackness and anti-blackness within the Muslim community, from a very young age, I was interacting with microaggressions, verbal aggressions, and even physical aggressions due to being black. And for me, it was like, okay, I cannot have my siblings grow up in an environment where they do not understand that they should be proudly black and Muslim, because there are figures such as Sumayya radiallahu anha who exist, who are strong black women who are able to do anything that they want, subhanAllah. So for me, it was important that through my ability to write, I use that to be able to find a solution for the issue and the identity conflict. And not everybody is a writer, not everybody is a speaker, not everybody is a protester. You find the lane in which you fit most comfortably, and that's so important, I think, when it comes to sustainable activism as well, really finding a pathway that fits for you. I started initially being that person who wanted to be at the front, and like not even wanted to be at the front, ended up being at the front, subhanAllah, because I'd like start the campaign and I'd start this and I'd start that, subhanAllah, and I found out that it's not sustainable for me, first of all in terms of my mental health, but second of all, I don't have the knowledge and the ability to keep that going and to keep that on the path that it should be. So I realized that I'm more of the person who I will be there when people have called upon me, kind of thing. I'm not going to put myself forward, and that's okay. You have to find people who are the leaders, the natural leaders, subhanAllah, to take up those positions, inshallah. And so Basira the basketballer was born out of sort of the issues of anti-blackness, and then as I developed and I grew older, I realized that we needed black Muslim spaces as well. There's an issue with some of our masjids, subhanAllah, that we walk into them and unfortunately we disconnect spiritually, because whether it be in an Islamic school environment, when our blackness is questioned, our Muslimness is questioned, when we're told that it's haram to do certain things that are associated with black culture, and you know there's a binary that's painted between being black and Muslim, that can make us quite uncomfortable as young people within Islamic schools, within our madrasas, within our masjids. So for me, it was like, okay, we need the aspect of spirituality, but then we also need to talk about these issues in relation to what is actually happening to us on a day-to-day basis. And so we created the Dabiri group, which is sort of working within creating more empathy and understanding within the Muslim community through our events, through our media, through our research. And so out of the Dabiri group came the Discovery Talk Show, alhamdulillah, and that talk show was the space. It is the space that we have created annually for Muslims to come and talk about, reflect about the year that has happened, the trends, the social media, relationships, mental health, everything that affects them on a day-to-day basis, and really revive the sunnah in a way that's relevant to them. So the most recent talk show, we were talking about men are trash, which is a discussion that I think is just everywhere, subhanAllah, at the moment. But it wasn't, okay, are men are trash, yes or no. It was more, okay, where does this fit with Islam? Is us saying this and replicating this idea, does that fit with Islam? Where does this fit in terms of politics and socially, where does this fit? And we had people talking about feminism and how that fit with Islam, talking about misogyny and patriarchy and how that exists within the Muslim community, and why people feel the need to use that phrase, and how we can use it constructively in a way that we can educate the younger generation, educate our men, our boys, about how they should be treating women. And so for me, centralizing, I think breaking down what it means to be Black in London is also very, very important, because I think everybody sort of appropriates this idea of Blackness but doesn't truly understand where all of these mix of different cultures come from, because being Black isn't one thing. It's not that you're Nigerian, it's not even that you're African, you could be Caribbean. So I think really truly understanding the makeup of that demographic that has been homogenized into one community is truly important in empathy and understanding as well. So again, when we go through these conflicts, just to conclude, and we go through these issues, it's really important to place your solution hat on. I teach kids, so place the solution hat on, and truly just understand how you can better yourself and your community as a result of this thing that you've gone through, inshallah.
Jazakum khairan, Hafsa. And I think in that we have already several things that all of us need to go and listen to and watch, and follow on Instagram and Facebook. So Hafsa, please send links for the Dabir group and for the podcast and everything on here, so that we can all join in that and learn and educate ourselves. But I think a lot of what you're talking about here is religion-based activism, being God-centric in everything that we're doing, and especially in our activism. And I'll go over to Ayo now, who the first time I came across Ayo was as a SOAS student, and in the SU, and seeing him lead some of our debates, and so well aware of the fact that Ayo is very much into activism. And how can, when we're approaching the issue of Black Lives Matter and the issue of everything that's happening now, we want to make it long, and you already mentioned that it has to be, we've missed an opportunity to make it to make Islam the solution, in the same way that Malcolm X alayhi rahmatullah did, and to offer Islam up as the solution to the issues that we're facing all over the world. It's not just a US problem, and it's not just a British problem. It is all over the world, and it's rampant in all of our communities, racism and especially anti-Blackness. So what tools do you have to make sure that when we are engaging in this activism, we do it in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And how can we approach right now that what's happening right now in our country, the toppling of statues and the Churchill's a racist and all this kind of stuff? How do we ensure that we're doing all of our activism in an effective way that truly benefits Black Muslims and the Black community generally, and justice as a virtue in and of itself, whilst being rooted in Islam?
Okay, no, that's a very good question. Jazakallah khair. I think everybody's going to go through a journey when it comes to engaging with wider movements, engaging yourself as an activist or as a community worker. And I think, first of all, one thing we need to understand is that Allah doesn't change the condition of the people until they change themselves, right? That ayah. And I think that is very, very important, because before I started when I was first on as an activist, I think I placed a lot of emphasis on the justice aspect of Islam, right? So I was very basically by any means necessary, justice at any cost, right? And there were effects and things that happened from that. And I think, when you're engaging in all of these activist spheres and you're posting online, honestly, like sometimes we forget to pray our salah, and we forget about other acts of worship, and we become so outward facing, we don't look inward, and we don't have that introspection. And I think it's so important, subhanAllah, that, I know there's a lot of people watching who are very passionate about issues. One thing we all need to understand is that if you really want to see a change out there, you have to start with yourself. And it includes, upholding acts of worship, giving the rights unto Allah first, then the rights unto yourself, eating healthily, sleeping healthily, all these sorts of things. Then giving your rights unto your parents. A lot of people are outside, doing, they're marching, they're speaking, but they're not doing much for their family in terms of even little things like doing chores and just giving them their rights. So there's levels to it. Your rights to Allah first. That's your foundation. If that's not there, then you're not going to be able to go to the next bit, which is your rights to yourself, taking care of yourself. Then the next bit, which is the rights to your family and close ones, your loved ones. Then the next bit is then the rest of society. And if you want to see a sustainable activism, you need to do things that way. And we also, working on the individual is important, because a society is made up of individuals. It's a collective of individuals. Imagine if everybody was to change themselves. Everybody was to make individual changes, we'd see a societal change. And I think also, just for sustainable activism, a lot of people here may be prone to burnout. Burnout is something, you know, it's very common, especially when you're very passionate. You know, you keep working on issues, you keep pushing forward. And again, you know, some of us will take on the mantle of, I need to be the giver of justice. I need to see, you know, my actions need to, you know, there needs to be a complete result that comes from my actions. And when people don't see that, they get demoralized, they get frustrated, they get angry. And again, these are understandable. I've felt them myself. It begins to spiral. And these things can then into bitterness, which can even go forth to affect your iman, because you start questioning, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And again, it's very, very important to remember, in this life, you know, I don't think, personally anyway, I don't think we're ever going to see a complete form of justice. Our actions can bring about some form. You know, we're given the different levels within the hadith. If you see an evil injustice, change it with your hand or an action. If you can't do that, speak out against it. And if you can't do that, keep the sentiment in your heart. And the sentiment in your heart is the weakest level of faith, right? We're given sort of different levels to go about bringing justice. But we need to remember that, you know, on the day of judgment, in the hereafter, Allah is going to give the most complete form of justice. And when you feel like you're boiling over, when you feel like, you know, I can't take this anymore, there's so much going on in the world and I don't understand it, you know, I want to see change, and, you know, you want it so badly, it's just important to rest assured that Allah is going to take care of all of this. And I've spoken about this on other Zoom calls and sort of other events, but I think it's very, very important I reiterate this, that Allah is Al-Hakam, right? Remember, He is the judge, the giver of justice. So trust in Him that He's going to bring that about. And again, I think you were talking about, you know, the toppling of statues and all this, all that sort of stuff that's going on. I think whenever we look at these issues, instead of running in, because sometimes, you know, there's a lot of hype around an issue, or there's something that we really want to get involved in. And again, that's commendable, the fact that you actually want to take action. You know, it's sort of putting that the highest level of you know, justice into effect, right? But you need to think about what's the risk of this and what's the benefit. You know, let's say, you know, just using arbitrary numbers, right? Say there's the risk is 9 out of 10, and the benefit is, say, 3 out of 10. That's not something you should be looking at, right? But say the risk is, say, 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, and the potential benefit is 9 out of 10. Then you think, okay, you know, it's just measuring and looking at the factors before you go forward and act. Just think, what repercussions is this gonna have, not just in this life, but in the hereafter. Because when we engage in activism, you know, engaging with a lot of these movements, yes, they have, you know, the core thing maybe they're trying to go for. You know, a lot of the BLM movements, you know, they're trying to see racial justice come about, right? But it's important that when looking at those things, we ask ourselves, how is this going to affect me? And, you know, engaging in this, how is it going to affect me in this life and the next life? And are these actions that are befitting of a Muslim? So even going down, looking at the statues being toppled down, you know, I think the advice I'm always given, right, is before you escalate actions, exhaust the actions before. So have you spoken to the council? Have you spoken to your MPs? Have you spoken to people around you, you know, the people that need to be consulted? Have you run a campaign? Have you tried to do things through the judicial system? Have you tried to do all those things? If you have not, and then you jump straight to the highest action, you know, escalating things, then you're not being proportionate and you're crossing limits. However, you know, if you have done due diligence to everything, and, you know, it's even to the point where the system is advocating against you, you know, then you find ways to push back without, you know, as long as you've escalated things and you've done your due diligence, then there's always going to be, it's easier to reconcile these things. But I'll be honest with you, some of these things are gray areas, and this is another important thing that is important to acknowledge. And to really understand what you're getting yourself into, because it will have effects in this life and the next. Sure. So.
Jazakumullah khair for that. I think, yeah, lots to think about there, and especially thinking before acting is a big one. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have, and there's a question here from Humera, who asked a bit earlier, how can we make sure that our activism, especially on social media, is not performative, and how can we make sure that we are actually being authentically allied and giving the support we need to the Black community, not just in these weeks where this might continue, but always throughout the rest of our lives, and generally speaking.
My question to a lot of people out there who are posting was, are you posting, you know, in solidarity and saying Black Lives Matter because it's what you sincerely feel, or is it because there were social pressures and there was a thing of, if I don't say something, perhaps I'll become isolated in a friendship group or people will call me out? If it's the second one, I think one really needs to take a good look at themselves and, you know, question why it had to be social pressures that pushed you into taking action, when there was so much going on in terms of racism and police brutality against Black people. I would actually say it's better to be silent, rather online anyway, rather than being pushed out to take you know, by social pressures, because it's just not genuine. And I think a lot of people were posting online, and there was a flurry of posts, right? And I think honestly, there was a good aspect to it, to the fact that people have now finally started, you know, acknowledging this, and, you know, whether it was due to social pressures or not, people are posting, right? So it was like awareness was being raised. But I think just going back to the hadith I mentioned before in terms of the level of justice, I do think there was this phrase called basically people saying, if you're silent, you're complicit. And I think we need to be careful of, you know, asserting that as a fact, because there were people, perhaps they weren't posting as much on social media where you could see them, but they challenged their parents and their families who, you know, say anti-Black things, you know, maybe, you know, Abid and Carla, all these derogatory names, right? They are back in their family homes, like challenging them, again, respectfully, but whenever something is said, they're always there in their ears saying something. And just because it wasn't being done where you could see it, you know, I don't think that makes them complicit. And even if you can't do that for whatever reason, you know, Allah's given us another level. Keep the sentiment in your heart. If you get to the point where you don't even care for this issue, where you look at, you know, a Black person dying on camera and you just can ignore it and you can go about your day without even making a dua or thinking about it other than that, then that's when you've lost it. You see what I'm saying? So that's when you're complicit, I would say. So Allah gives us these levels because we don't know what's in people's hearts. We don't know what people's situations are. Don't get me wrong, we still need to hold each other to account, right? Outside of this, there's a lot of people watching, or people on social media who have connections to masajid, to masjid boards, imams, halakha groups. They need to start having conversations about this, where we literally, you know, people are challenging each other, right? And, you know, this is something I really want to see. I want to see imams on the minbar at the Jummah khutbah, right? And they're challenging the congregation members, because a lot of this, like, we're talking here, a lot of these sentiments are contained in the older generation, sorry. And they're not on here, right? And again, so these social media posts were going around, and it was all in this echo chamber. You know, I was going on different stories, and again, an aspect of it was good. People were raising awareness, but the people who really need this, like even more than the people in your echo chambers, are the people at home, your wider families, who they're not going to be really looking at this. Maybe they've seen the video and they're not going to see any of this. So we really need to direct that in the right direction. And just the last thing, just on doing that, some people say, you know, you have to call out your family, that sort of call out culture, right? And I think to some extent that's true. Yeah, I understand. But let's be honest, a lot of people can't, you know, just call out their parents. And a lot of people are not in the situation to do that because they could, you know, there may be unstable family situations, or they may not have a great family dynamic. So you're asking them to throw themselves into an action which will actually, you know, overcome them and bring them more harm, right? So I think just be strategic with it. I know when I want to ask my mom something, you know, maybe I'll wash the dishes, maybe I'll make some food, just do something nice. Then I'll start some small convo, or speak about other things, just so she doesn't know what I'm trying to get at. Then I move on to the discussion of where I really want to get to. You know, it may cause the rift. It may cause a rift, you know, between you and your family members, but it's got to be repeated. And when you feel that anxiety, when you feel that discomfort, we need to remember that we each, you know, all of us, each and every one of us have that responsibility to uphold justice in our households. We have to. It's part of our, you know, responsibility as believers. And again, it's coming back to what I said in the beginning. You know, I would have really loved to have seen the Muslims leading the way on how do we look at the issue of racism, but we couldn't do that. Why couldn't we do that? Because we actually feed into the issue as a, you know, as a community. Muslims who aren't Black, Arab and Asian Muslims and wider Muslims, they actually feed into the issue, so they're part of the problem. And, you know, subhanAllah, I want to get to a point where we can actually say, no, the Muslims are the one who are providing the solution. People are looking to us. How do we go about doing this? And we need to engage in politics. We need to engage in things around us. It has to be from a principled mindset, and we need to try and, you know, we need to try and use the prophetic teachings, Quranic teachings, and our legacy within our religion to be able to do that. So.
Jazakallah khair for that, Ayo. Hafsa, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I has literally said everything, mashallah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think just going back to the point of just critically analyzing oneself, I think it's so important that when you've made that post, like I said, you're looking back home and thinking, okay, have I done anything within my household? Have I done anything as an individual to critically reflect on my own privilege and what I actually think about Black Lives Matter, and do I actually believe Black Lives Matter? Because I think social media you can use it for good and you can use it to educate, but a lot needs to happen offline as well, inshallah.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that sentiment, and thank you. Mustafa, do you have anything to add to what Ayo and Hafsa have already said?
I've been seeing a lot of people attacking people for performative activism and attacking people for, pretending to be allies, and I just feel like that conversation, although it is valid and people need to judge their own intentions as to why they are participating in these things, is very unproductive towards the cause, because we can't be upset when people don't speak out, and then when people do speak out, we start cancelling them and saying, oh, you're just doing it because it's cool, or you're just doing it to jump on a bandwagon. I mean, recently I was invited on a live by an influencer on Instagram, and somebody else who's another influencer that's a friend of mine said to me, why are you jumping on this person's live? They're just performative activism. Why did they never speak about this before? And they're only inviting me to speak about it now, and you shouldn't be the token Black person, etc., etc. And I said to them, it doesn't matter what the person's intention is, even though I have good opinion as a Muslim. We're supposed to have husnul dhan billah wa husnul dhan bi ibadillah, good opinion of Allah and good opinion of the slaves of Allah. Even though I have a good opinion of this person and I don't feel like it was performative activism, even if it was, the fact that they invited me on their platform and I was able to educate and enlighten up to 150,000 people through that person shows that it's productive for the cause, even if their intention wasn't good. The intentions of the people tuning in, watching, etc. are. So I just feel like it's very counterproductive to now, because people are, you never know when people can become enlightened or can change. So I feel like it's wrong to judge people and say, oh no, you never cared before, you just care now, or etc., and kind of rubbish their efforts. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't see Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab, we wouldn't have given him a chance to become Muslim. When he was on his way to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and then he arrived and heard Surah Taha being read and then decided to convert and change to Islam, the same people would have stood by and said, no, you were attacking him yesterday, you weren't a part of Islam yesterday, and now you want to be a part of it, and dismiss his efforts. So I do feel like that is counterproductive. But at the same time, people need to look at their intention. People need to think about the fact that, are they helping it because it's a trend or because everyone's talking about it, or are they helping it because they are genuinely concerned? But even then, that's between them and themselves, and that's between them and Allah. But in terms of us, anyone that's supporting the movement, anyone that's helping the movement should be encouraged and should be supported. And who knows the benefit that they could then bring through their performative activism.
Can I just add on to that for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think there's a duality in the sense that there's performative allyship and performative sort of support and solidarity that is helpful and is actually shining a light on the issues that need to be shone on. But then there's also performative allyship that's centered within their morals and values and what they think solidarity looks like that becomes harmful. So for example, someone actually asked what has the response been in Arab countries, and I've seen a number of Arab influencers who have resorted to blackface and statements that they wish that they were black, and then that's their show of solidarity. That's performative because you don't know what the issue is, since you've decided to do something that is extremely racist. And even when they have been countered and people have advised them that this is blackface, you should probably take this down, I've seen statements like, no, this is me showing my love, and all of this criticism is because you guys just hate me. And it's very sort of self-centered in that form of allyship. So for me, I think when people say performative allyship, it needs to be sort of solidarity that's centered within what the movement actually needs. And if you're replicating that information, fine. But I would always advise that if anyone has, put up a black square for Black Tuesday, whatever it was, Blackout Tuesday, that you then take that incentive to listen and to educate yourself. And that should be a starting point rather than the end all and the beginning and the end all and of your activism and your allyship, inshallah.
Mustafa, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree. In terms of we need to differentiate between performative activism and performative allyship that is beneficial and is harmful. And so, that is also, again, through education, because I'm sure these people, clearly the fact that in this time they stood up and did something like blackface, they weren't even educated enough to realize that wasn't correct. So that I completely agree with the point. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, for me, listening to the three of you speak and sort of following the news over the last, not just couple of weeks, but the last 10 years, because this is nothing new when you look at the names, of people who have been killed, unfortunately, in this, not just in the States, but in this country. So many names. I mean, you can go back all the way to the 90s where you had Rodney King or Trayvon Martin or Philando Castile or Eric Garner or Michael Brown or Walter Scott or Alton Sterling, and now George Floyd. This is something which is continuing. And the frustration from me looking at this is, why is it that the people who have caused this injustice, why they can never take any accountability? And that was, for me, something what Ayo just touched upon there is, we should all look at changing ourselves before we change the world. And for me, the two things what have come out of this is education and accountability. If everyone educates themselves and if everyone takes accountability, we can all be united to tackle on all the injustices together as one, as well. That was sort of my thoughts. Ayo, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, just I just also want to clarify that I don't think the working on yourself and educating aspect is something that it should be like, okay, you don't take any action at all and you just work and educate yourself. Although that may be the way for some people, I think it is a sort of simultaneous thing and actively listening. And sometimes there are things which you see on social media which requires a comment. Some things don't require a comment. So I think it's just, in the actions you're taking, just actively listen, look at what's going on, survey things, and just be proportionate in what you're doing. Try not to cross those limits. I think one thing I want to say, because you mentioned a lot of American names, there are two names which instantly come to mind when I think of this. One is Adrian Donald from Staffordshire, 2014. He was bitten very seriously by a police dog, and he was also tasered. And he ended up, the last words he said was, "I can't breathe," before he died in the back of a police van. Christopher Adler is another one that may be well known, featured in one of Akala's lectures. Basically arrested, put in police custody, and he was basically choking. And the police stood over him while he was choking and dying, made monkey noises over him. And what actually a lot of people don't know, but from speaking to his sister who campaigns a lot, is that they actually buried the wrong body, either through malicious intent or neglect. Unconsciously, I'm not sure. And his body, they buried the wrong body, and the family thought his body was buried, and they were actually using the body in a morgue for sort of teaching purposes and things. So, when I heard these sort of stories, these are things happening in the UK. So I know a lot of people say that the racism in the US is worse than the UK. I think if you were to talk to the families and the relatives of those individuals, just two of those individuals I've spoken on, they will tell you a very, very different story. There's other stats and other things that I could mention, but I think we should sort of be careful of saying that what's going on in the US is a lot worse than the UK, because I don't think you can categorically say that.
Thank you for that reminder. And I was going to come on to Stephen Lawrence, which is probably the most famous case in this country of institutionalized racism. But Jazakallah khair for sort of correcting me there and reminding me of that. I've got a couple of questions from people who are in the chat who just want to ask, who've got asked all three of our guests questions. There's one for yourself, Brother Mustafa. So Hannah has just asked, on your Insta, you had a post about moving back home and investing in our motherlands as a way of creating a sustainable future. Could you please elaborate more on this?
Yeah, personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I'm somebody that has a very strong connection to my roots. I'm somebody that has a very strong connection to Africa. I'm a third or second generation British Black British. So my grandmother immigrated here in the 50s. My mother was born here and I was born here. So I'm the second generation in my family that was born in the UK. But regardless of that, I still managed to travel back home to Africa. I still managed to, alhamdulillah, like have property there, focus on building a house there. And I just feel like it's important as people of color to have options, because you can't, unfortunately, the reality is you can't demand justice for yourself in a society that wasn't built with you in mind. British people, like, we are British. Well, I mean, we even need to think about the fact of us as people of color. How did we end up here in this country in the first place? It was because the British, most of us, colonized where we came from. And then when they needed workers, they allowed our ancestors to come into the country and work for them. After World War II ended and the British system needed people to replace them, people from the colonies were brought in and given opportunity to study in the UK, given opportunity to work in the UK. And it's not something that I feel like we should be grateful to the UK for. It's a right that we are owed, because they wouldn't be Great Britain without them colonizing our countries and taking our resources and taking our people and selling them. So my ancestors coming here to get their educations and to work here and to take back the money that was taken from them is reparations. It's not a favor done to me. But the fact that we are here now, this is not a black society. This is not a society of people of color. And as long as you're not in your own society, people will and can oppress you. And you have really, we can say what we want, and we should appeal to people's sense of justice, and we should appeal to people's sense of righteousness. But realistically, it's not our country. Like, this is not our place. Even though we have tried to find a place for ourselves here, if people have their country and they decide to behave in a certain way, you have to have your options and say, well, I have the land of my ancestors, I have land in another country. If living life here becomes unbearable, then I can go back and I have different options. So I feel like everyone that is a person, and the fact that, you know, most of the countries that we come from are underdeveloped. We don't have high levels of access to good medical care, good economic situations, infrastructure, etc., that we're used to in the West. Again, leaning back to the fact that when we were colonized, people took our resources and invested them in their own infrastructure and building their own economies and not building us. It's up to us now, who have education, who have access to opportunity, who've seen how life functions in the West, to maybe go back home, invest in buying property there, invest in putting things there, and invest in supporting the system there, so that we can have a standard of living similar to the standard of living we have here, in order for us to be able to eventually move back. I feel like it's so important. I mean, the UK, if I ever feel uncomfortable living in the UK, or if I ever feel like I'm not being granted my rights, or I'm not being granted equal access to opportunities, I feel happy knowing that I have property in Gambia, I have a house in Gambia, I can go and sit down in my house. The lifestyle might not be as great and as high standard as the lifestyle I'm living in the UK, but at least I'm not a victim of systematic oppression and injustice. And if there were 1,000 people like me that came from the UK with their pounds, with their dollars, with their university degrees, with their education, and tried to help improve the situations in their home countries, then maybe it would be more bearable to live there, and you wouldn't feel like you needed to live in the West. And this is something that we see with a lot of people. I mean, you know, with the whole protesting and Black Lives Matter movement, people have been saying, well, what are the solutions to this problem? And one of the solutions that you know, the Nation of Islam proposed in their day, when Malcolm X was a part of them, was that the Black people needed to separate themselves from the system that they were being oppressed in, because you can't expect your oppressors to have goodwill and you know, concern enough for you to say, okay, well, you know, we're being mean, slap on the hands, let's elevate these people and give them the rights that they're due, when they were never going to do it in the first place. It's only out of convenience to them that they will give you the rights that you are owed. You know, the slavery, when it became an economic burden, and when it was the Civil War and everything, if you study the history, that's when they decided to abolish slavery. It wasn't out of justice or compassion towards black people, or saying, oh, we now see them as equal, or we now see them as whatever. It was an economic decision that was for the betterment of their state and their situation. The same thing with the civil rights movement, and the same thing with even the arresting of these police officers that killed the man that sparked these protests. These 4 officers would have got away with it if everyone wasn't setting the country on fire and burning everything down. That's just the reality, and we all know that that is the reality. So living in a situation like that, you need to be able to think, do I have options? Can I go somewhere else? And realize that this is not, like, you can't go to someone's house and expect them to treat you the same way they treat their children in their own house. They can be nice to you, they can be guests if they feel like it, but it's not conducive to your own self-respect to want to beg for your rights in a place that's not your own. So yeah, have options. That was my personal, very, very personal opinion.
Jazakallah for sharing that with us, Brother Mustafa. We are 6 minutes away from the Adhan, so we will have the Adhan video playing shortly. Before I just chat a little bit about what the Adhan is for the non-Muslims here, Hafsa, Ayo, do you guys have any final thoughts you guys want to share just quickly before we wrap up? Hafsa, you can go first.
Yeah, I would just say, if you're Muslim, center your Islam. That is like literally the most imperative thing within situations like this and times like this. Do not stray from your salah, as Ayo said. Make sure you really focus on the compulsory things. But then also learn about, like, develop your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spiritually and have a good foundation to begin any sort of activism on, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us, and may He make us comfortable with the idea that justice isn't something that we can provide for ourselves, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Hafsa. And Ayo, any final thoughts?
Hard to summarize everything. I think everything, there's still actions happening, people are still protesting, they're doing all of that. I think do what you can, don't overwhelm yourself in terms of having to, I need to do this, I need to do that. It's a long game. You know, in 3-4 weeks, perhaps when a bit of the hype has died down, it's very important to keep pushing on this issue in different ways, to keep, you know, making the eyes very important at this time as well. For the families of, you know, George Floyd, family and friends of George Floyd, the daughter he's left behind, you know, all the other victims of police brutality and violence. I think dua for the black community. So for those who don't know what dua means, by the way, non-Muslims, it means prayer. It's actually a supplication for the black community that Allah, you know, eases their pain, our pain, you know, allows us to be able to just, you know, give them comfort, what they need, whether it be donations, whether it be just solidarity. Basically, yeah, I think, inshallah, just we're able to provide those things that, you know, by Allah's will, we're able to just show them that we, as a community, are here for them and here to support them. So yeah, I think that's all from me. May Allah accept it, and Jazakallah khair for having us all on. It's been much appreciated.
Jazakallah khair for your thoughts, Ayo. We are 3 minutes away till the Adhan, and so for the non-Muslims who are joining us, thank you for joining us. The Adhan, which you'll hear, is a call for prayer. So what you'll see is there'll be a short supplication before the Adhan prayer and a short supplication after the video, and then you'll hear the call for prayer, which is which Muslims hear before all 5 prayers throughout the day. So Muslims, as you know, pray 5 times a day. We're coming up to the sunset prayer, which is the Maghrib Prayer, and this is the moment where Muslims around the world will break their fast. For those who are fasting the Sunnah fast, or when it's during Ramadan, those guys will be partaking in starting their iftar meals. Normally take this moment a couple of minutes before the Adhan. I think there's just 2 minutes to go to have a bit of reflection. But since we do have the brother Mustafa here, do you mind doing a short dua for everyone, Mustafa?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. اللهم انصرنا فإنك خير الناصرين وافتح لنا فإنك خير الفاتحين واغفر لنا فإنك خير الغافرين وارحمنا فإنك خير الراحمين وارزقنا فإنك خير الرازقين وحدنا ونجنا من القوم الظالمين. وهدنا ونجنا من القوم الظالمين وهدنا ونجنا من القوم الظالمين. Ya Allah, please accept our fasts, accept our ibadah, accept our worship and make it sincerely for your sake, and support us because you are the best of supporters, and support all of those who are being oppressed across the world. Show mercy to us because you are the best of those who show mercy, and show mercy to all of those who are being oppressed across the world. Guide us and save us from the oppressors, and allow us to become your representatives in this earth, people who fight for justice and establish justice, people who represent you within the creation, and not people who are part of those who the angels said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Will you create a creation that will cause corruption on the earth and shed blood? May Allah allow us to be of those who He knows more about their affair than the angels did, and who represent Him in the creation, and who are opposed to injustice and oppression wherever it is, inshallah, in whichever way we can. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ameen.
Assalamu alaikum all. Once again, thank you for joining us this evening. I just want to say a big thank you to the inspirational Ayo Alatunji, Mustafa Briggs, and Hafsa Dabiri. It was a really great session. Really appreciate you guys taking your time out and enlightening us all and inspiring us all to continue to keep doing what we do. So I just want to say from me personally, big thank you to the three of you. Big thank you to my co-host Sarah. Really appreciate you helping out today. And also a big thank you to everyone who's joined us today, who's interacted, who has asked questions, who has liked us on Facebook. We really do appreciate your support. I do have one final call for action, and that is a call for our LaunchGood page, for you to visit our LaunchGood page. The website is launchgood.com/sustainrtp. It's currently on your screen right now, and reason for this is that the Ramadan Tent Project are on a mission to bring communities together to better understand one another. We have been at your service for the past 7 years and have brought over 1,000 people with our flagship event, New Open Iftar. This Ramadan, we kept the Ramadan spirit alive, and we connected over 70,000 people across the world with the hashtag #MyOpenIftar and hosted the first ever global Iftar. Now, with our Sunnah fast and many new exciting initiatives soon to be revealed, we aim to continue bringing communities together in the spirit of Islam. So please, we ask you, if you could help us, donate at the website launchgood.com/sustainrtp. As I mentioned at the start of this session, we will be back on Thursday, where we will be joined by Sheikh Haytham Tamim, and he will be talking about how to overcome the Ramadan blues and maintaining taqwa. Finally, from me, once again, I just want to say a big thank you to Ayo, to Hafsa, and to Mustafa. Again, really appreciate everything you guys have done, not just for this evening, but what you guys have been doing for our communities. I can't thank you enough for that. And finally, big thank you to everyone who's joined us. Please, guys, stay safe out there, look after yourselves, and from me, goodbye and assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khairan, everyone.